Hey, Ernest. Looks like we're going live.
Hey, Ben. There we are.
Welcome to today. We are going to be doing another installment of the DataTel IT Knowledge Nuggets. This was really inspired by us wanting, it initially started out with us doing internal knowledge sessions to make sure that our, entire employee base is aware of, ongoing changes in the IT industry and security threats, stuff like that, and just spread awareness. And we're like, let's just do this externally as well so that everyone can get the value, right? Why not, right? So this is I'm excited about where this is going, and there's lots of cool things that we're going to learn, and every single time I feel like I learn more as well, just personally being new to the industry within the last couple of years. Learning from other folks who are have been doing this for a very, very long time. So I love it. I'm excited. So my name is Ben Tiglar. I'm the CEO of DataTel. Ernest?
I am Ernest Murray. I am the CISO at DataTel.
Cool. And I like to think of Ernest as the wizard in the sky who knows a lot of things and is able to bring things together in a way that just makes sense, at least to me. So that's why I love Ernest, and I'm excited to continue to learn more from you, man.
Well, thank you. Yeah, we've
what are
got
we
some
talking
fun
about
things
today?
to talk about today.
What
Looking over the past year from looking at IT security threats. I know, last week we dug into the specific IT security threats, sort of how they work in depth. Now we're going to zoom out a little bit and take a look at a broader range of what's been happening over the past year, what sort of looking at a couple of big threats that occurred, big breaches that occurred, and diving into the tool sets, methodologies, and mindset that could prevent these kinds of breaches from impacting people. And as we'll discover, there are some that there's not much we can do about.
I think my parents said something. It is what it is, but we got to do everything we can to control the stuff that is within our control. So
Exactly.
That resonates. Cool. You want to jump into it?
Absolutely. Let's do it. So, introduction to IT security threats. 2024 was a really big year, and there were lots of major news headlines that were made around IT security and its complexities. And yeah, let's dive in and take a look at some of them. Overview of the landscape. Really, the biggest two items in the IT security threat landscape are phishing attacks and advanced ransomware attacks. So reports are indicating at this point about a 20% increase in cyber incidents compared to last year. So it's just every year it gets worse and worse and worse. It never gets better. Addressing these threats is really important, especially when it comes to business continuity. We are seeing that a single incident can cost an organization millions of dollars, not just in direct costs, but in costs to their reputation and in downstream costs to their vendors and clients. So it's really important to address these things as rapidly as we can. In the small business market, when a small business is impacted by a significant cyber breach attack, where they do not have the backups and processes and systems in place, they typically will go out of business within 6 months of suffering from a cyber attack. So those are the sobering reality of where we are. And while I do not like to go out and talk on a level of what we call FUD, or fear, uncertainty, and doubt, it's important that we understand and get the knowledge out there that this is a real thing. These threats are not something that targets somebody else. They are widespread, and they're scattershot these days. It's using AI, it's utilizing automation. It's not one person saying, I'm targeting that individual, or I'm going to target that company. They're just throwing out everything that they can and spraying the water hose as wide as they can to see who they can catch and how many folks they can gather insight from. And then they utilize and mine those statistics of the accounts and the systems and the companies they have access to see if there's something more valuable that they should dive deeper into, or if they could leverage you to reach somebody else that is on their high priority target list.
So when you say email email compromise, what exactly does that mean? Does that mean someone has access to your entire, your entire email system? Is it a single user? Oh, okay.
A business
You're
email
on it.
compromise. It's like I knew you were going to say that. Business email compromise is we'll dive a little bit deeper into that. Business email compromise is any time that an attacker gains access to your inbox, gains access to your Microsoft 365 or Google account. Does not have to be global, does not have to be admin level access, just access to your inbox alone is a treasure trove of data and information, especially if you're somebody who deals with finances. So HR, payroll, AP, all of those sorts of positions are really super for them to gain access to, because then they can start looking at the flow of money. Especially a lot of people will think that email is secure and send payment information such as bank account numbers or credit card numbers directly over email. These are all gold mines for these threat actors who are trying to get in and gather data they can turn to money.
I've heard of situations where you've got a bad actor who's able to just stay inside of your system for months at a time. Is that like the more frequent approach? Hey, get in and collect information and data to try to go for a bigger, or as soon as they get in, they're taking action? Like, what's the typical path for that?
I have seen it vary drastically. They if they can retain a foothold, they will. But most of the time, for the average person, they'll gain access to someone lower level within the organization and utilize their account simply to send out a whole bunch of fake emails to try and get somebody else to click on the link, especially other people internally. So they'll try to work themselves from that mailbox, maybe up to HR or somebody in the C-suite, to gain access to that level, because that person's going to have even bigger contacts that they can gain access to. Now, once they land in a box or land in somebody's account that's flagged as a, hey, this company is a high priority, or this user is a high priority, this position is, then often they'll stop. They don't spread that out. They don't start spamming emails, and that's where they'll sit. That's when they'll just gain access and monitor and try to look for a large transaction. So, for example, we had a client last year who uh, one of their suppliers was breached, and they sat very quietly and very patiently inside of that inbox because they landed at the person who's requesting accounts, who's sending out invoices. And then they found, hey, this is a very large invoice that's going out. It's over $1 million that they're trying to collect on. And that's the company that they were targeting to get that money from, was our client. So they registered a very similar domain name to try and then sent emails from that domain name. And they actually took the entire email thread and replied to it. They did everything right. It actually took me a good minute of looking at the domain name to discover that they had just dropped an I, and that's all that was missing, was one letter. Um, so this is how they try to target and gain access. They're very patient in certain circumstances, but most of the time it's just a widespread. Let's see who we can gain access to.
Got it. Kind of a related question from Sarah. What's the best way to share sensitive information instead of via email?
That is a fantastic question. And the best way to share sensitive information is through encrypted email. So if you've got simple stuff that you need to gain back and forth, such as payment information, Microsoft has an encryption, especially if you have their business premium license level. It's included. It's part of what you do. There's a little button at the top of your when you're sending an email that gives you the option to secure or encrypt that email before you send it. Highly recommend utilizing that. What it does is it keeps the email on Microsoft servers and essentially just sends a link to the user. Then they gain access to that website. So the actual information's not transiting through email. It's kept securely on Microsoft servers under the company's security purview.
Got it. So business premium included, and it's something that you can manually apply.
Yep.
And things like when you're sending out social security numbers or employment information or credit card information or anything that could be impactful you don't want strangers looking at might be a good best
Exactly.
practice.
And for our fully managed clients, we also put in a rule that looks for the word secure or the word encrypt in the subject line, and will automatically apply that encryption when it detects one of those two words.
Cool.
Yeah. So some metrics around business email compromise. FBI in 2022 reported losses of more than $2.4 billion. That was a 65% increase from 2021. Now, these metrics are 2 years old. If we're seeing an increase in business email compromise, you can imagine that this has gone up exponentially from then. So curious to see what the new metrics and new numbers look like when they come out next year. But it's a big deal and it's a big industry. When you stick the big B behind it, you got a lot of very hungry people going after a piece of that pie. And as we talked about last week, it's easy, right? It's becoming easier and easier. You don't have to be some mastermind criminal or super geeky developer or anything like that. They have these platforms you can go and rent on the dark web to gain access to the technology necessary to carry out these types of attacks and profit from them. Common tactics. So looking at things like phishing emails and social engineering, we talked about fake email accounts and how they can mimic legitimate ones. Um, that's really the biggest way that we see things happening right now is through those fake email accounts. So email authentication is really a big thing this year that even Google and Microsoft are enforcing now certain levels of email authentication, which we'll talk about in a bit, that were previously just kind of left under the rug and not a big deal, and now that's becoming a big deal because of this. Let's talk about email authentication. So, what Datatel does. First thing we do is monitor for lookalike domains. So we actually have a service that looks at all of our clients' domains, looks for anything newly registered domain-wise, or that has had a recent IP address update on the A records or MX records, which are your website record and your mail records, to let us know if somebody's making changes to a domain that could be used for in a phishing or email compromise attack. We monitor those on a daily basis. When something comes up, we'll either take action on it by blocking access to that domain or blocking inbound emails for those domains. We can't take action on taking down the domains or requesting they get deleted until they actually cause a problem. But we do notify our clients when those are found, ones that we can confirm are suspicious.
It sounds like that one's really important for protecting internally employees getting taken advantage of, right? Rather than external threats.
I would say it's more important on the external side because you're protecting your clients, because somebody's going to register a domain to send email as you. They could send email inbound as well, but likely your internal systems would say, hey, this name matches that name. That's a very common filter now on email systems. So it would be more likely that they would use it to send email outbound to your suppliers or customers.
Got it.
Which makes it even harder to try and track what's happening. Second thing we do is implement full email authentication. So these are all the different acronyms for all the different stuff out there, but in a high level, SPF says what IP addresses are allowed to send from your email domain. DKIM is like a signature. It's a digital signature, gets applied to every email, and it validates that signature so that it verifies that the server that sent the message and that the message hasn't been tampered with in transit. DMARC is the policy that validates the first two and says, if something fails on one of these two, send me a report. Reject the email message or quarantine the message and then send me a report. So we're able to track when somebody tries to spoof a domain name. MTA STS is an inbound authentication protocol that says, hey, make sure you always deliver messages to me encrypted. So it doesn't allow plain text emails. It enforces at least that last hop to be fully encrypted. And then DNSSEC is a security mechanism around DNS as a whole that validates the server that's sending the records is the server that is authorized for that domain. That one gets a little more complex. We're not going to dive into the details on it, but it is important to ensure that an attacker can't DNS spoof your domain and say, hey, I am abccompany.com, and you should, listen to me for all of the email authentication, SPF, DKM, all of those sorts of things. So DNSSEC is not as valuable as they had hoped it would be, but it is a good mechanism to put in place regardless. Then we monitor actively those DMARC reports. So remember, we talked about those reports that get sent in. Sometimes the most common thing we see is somebody in the client's marketing department went out and signed up for MailChimp or some third-party mailing service and then just didn't tell us about it. So they're sending out emails from the company and they are legitimate, but they're getting blocked. That's the most common thing that we see. But monitoring those reports is really important for detecting an uptick or detecting those attackers who may be trying to send as your domain. Next one is multi-layer email filtering. So both at the edge and what we call API, which means in mailbox. So email threats are evolving minute by minute. And you can't just rely on a filter that it used to be, hey, we just have a spam filter here. All the email passes through it before it reaches my inbox. But now people are using standard Google domains. You have the business email compromise attacks that we talked about, where they just spam a whole bunch of stuff from a very legitimate domain and from somebody you have talked to in the past. And when those emails come in, it's important that there's something inside the mailbox that gives us the ability to either remediate or remove those messages. And it also gives us the ability to run further AI checks without delaying for the message to get through. Because we want to get those emails delivered as quickly as we can, but we also want to retain the ability to pull those emails out if we later determine that they're bad. DNS filtering and SSL proxy scanning. We talked about our SGN SASE solution a couple of weeks ago. This does that as well. So if an attacker has a domain that we've identified, this is being used for phishing and it's being used to gather credentials or try to install something bad on your computer, we're able to block those across our entire client base within a few clicks. SIEM integration is also really important. What that does is it monitors inside of the email systems for rules that get created, like, hey, move these emails from this person to that over here, or suddenly this person's logging in from a different part of the country than what they've logged into in the past. And then the SOAR functionality is automated response. So when the SIEM detects that there's a threat, without a human even needing to get involved, it's like hey, this is a 90% chance that this is a bad actor has gained access to this account. It'll automatically shut down the account and lock the attacker out. Because responding to these things within minutes is super important. That's really the best we can do these days. Is we've got to detect rapidly and shut it down rapidly before they can do damage.
Is SIEM and SOAR always connected? Like, are they always together? Or are they independent sometimes?
They are independent functions. SOAR usually, like the very vast majority of the time, relies on a SIEM to function, but it's very rare to find a good SIEM and SOAR combination that works well together. They're usually separate purchases, separate companies and entities. You've got to define all these rules on how things in the playbooks will work.
Got it. Is there any value to having them be separate?
No, it's just that there's very few people that have come up with a good combination of the two, because usually the SIEM vendors focus on collecting the data, processing and searching, and being efficient at working with the data. SOAR is a completely different realm. It's involved into tying into APIs to execute actions and trigger functions. So finding them tied together or finding a vendor who's good at both is difficult.
Makes sense. Thanks, Ernest.
So let's dive a bit into our next topic, which is ransomware attacks. Ransomware used to be this really simple thing where you would get something on your computer and it would just encrypt all of your contents. And it just started as a cruel joke. It's no longer a cruel joke. The next thing it escalated to was, we're going to hold things for ransom. Now you've got to pay us money to get things unlocked. At that point, what happened was people, the ransomware side, people became really good at backups. There were multiple copies of data, and vendors started putting backups in place to be able to rapidly recover from these ransomware attacks where they're being held hostage. So the attackers then lost their funding source. So what was the next thing they started doing? Now what they do is they exfiltrate your data. In other words, they grab a copy of all of your information and send it to their servers. Then they ransomware everything. So even if you can recover from backups and get your systems back online, all they can do is just threaten to release your data to the public and get all of your private information out there for everybody to see, and damage your reputation and do all of that. And that's the way that ransomware attacks have evolved, if you will, over time.
When you said at the starting of that, it's almost like it's the equivalent of getting rickrolled.
Mm-hmm. That's how it started. You know, some kid
Yeah.
thinking, "Hell, this will be funny, right? I'll just send this over, and it'll lock up somebody's computer so they can't do anything." And then it evolved rapidly from there. So, yeah, we talked about the definition. It requires payment for a decryption key. So this is rapidly evolving in complexity, and now there actually used to be some code amongst most of the large threat groups that they would stay away from things like hospitals or life-saving 911 dispatch centers, etc. All of that's out the window now. Everybody's a target. There is no good bad actors anymore. So in 2023, there was an increase of over 40% in ransomware attacks. Again, we're in 2024, so we'll see what those numbers look like next year. But it's again going to be a 40, 50, 60% increase. These things happen all the time. And so typically a small business will face somewhere between around $200,000 of payout per incident, not to mention the other financial impacts of having to provide credit monitoring, having to recover your systems, and all of that comes into play. This is where cybersecurity insurance can come in and provide some assistance with those expenses, but cybersecurity insurance more and more is refusing to pay the ransom because they're trying to shut down the attackers' desire to carry out these attacks.
So, but there is going to be coverage. If you've got cybersecurity insurance, you'll likely have some coverage in the event of an incident.
Cybersecurity coverage is super important. The reason it's super important is for covering things like income loss, covering the breach monitoring. They have incident response teams who will come in and do a full forensics layout to determine what happened and make sure that the attackers don't still have access to your data, determine what data was taken or stolen or ransomed. It is really important to have cybersecurity insurance. The other thing it does is if anybody then comes after you, one of your clients or customers comes after you because their information was included in that breach and they were impacted by it, that cybersecurity insurance will help cover the lawyers and fees and costs for all of that, which is what will drive a business out of business in a heartbeat. Yep, we talked about the impact, right? It's estimated $20 billion of impact in 2024. And we're seeing huge industries, healthcare, finance, particularly vulnerable. And there's a lot more regulatory penalties. So let's talk about the regulatory penalties because that's been really a big story in 2024. The government's really coming down hard on people, and then they're not just coming down hard on the companies, they're coming down hard on the C-suite. So if you're a CIO, for example, this year, a CIO of a large company who got breached was personally held responsible because this was the second breach at a company he had been a part of, and because he made specific decisions to not put proper protocols in place within the organization. And so he has been personally sanctioned and can't hold certain positions and roles anymore and has to pay certain amounts of money and has to provide all of this reporting and everything up to the government. So they are holding people responsible now. And that's really been the big thing. And that's going to continue to get worse and worse and worse and bigger and more automated as we move forward.
What's wild is that a lot of these rules have been in place for many years.
Yes.
Like minimum requirements have been in place. And even in industries like healthcare, right, where you have HIPAA, which is a significantly increased burden on the business because they're they've got information that's extremely valuable. And, you know, from businesses in the space that I've seen, there's still just a massive amount of, hey, we don't need to do that. It doesn't really matter. Not thinking about the long term. It's just been surprising for me to see companies with that type of information being so, you know, do you think it just comes down to a lack of knowledge, or is it a lack of care? Or I see that
Money. It all
with,
boils down to
yeah,
money.
it's money.
If you've got to pay another $20, $30 per computer to provide proper protection on it, that can, you know, that's money. And especially with the way that most businesses are architected, your C-level, your CIO and CFO, et cetera, are all driving to reduce costs. That's the whole thing. They've got to reduce cost, not increase cost, and it just puts an unfair burden on everybody, because they can't make the decisions that are actually best for the company to truly save the company money. They're pseudo saving money. They think like it looks right on the balance sheet, but then when an incident occurs, all of that savings goes right out the window.
Got a question from Shane. How do you see artificial intelligence affecting this, I think, ransomware attacks going forward?
So one of the key things that we always used to teach people about monitoring their inbound emails when we did user education was look for spelling mistakes, look for phrasing that's weird, look for things that are off. Artificial intelligence has taken that whole chunk and just tossed it out the window, because now they can just type in a prompt and it's going to generate hundreds of different responses. We're also
Plus, we
seeing
should
that.
have tools that should find those specific things, right? Like they'll identify high risk
Yeah,
language,
right.
you know. So the technology on our side, on the business side, has gotten better, so we don't necessarily need to be as stringent
Right.
about that, right?
About that. But then again, with the artificial intelligence, that's going out the window. They're also using AI now to write a unique email. So rather than thousands of the same message getting sent out, which we can easily identify a pattern to and block, every message is now written individually based on the history of the person's communication, to an extent that it becomes almost indistinguishable from what's coming from a real person. That's what's happening with artificial intelligence that we're starting to see more and more in this realm. So great question. Uh,
Another,
yeah,
I got another interesting one. How
yeah,
frequently does paying ransomware attackers actually get your data unlocked?
that
I
is a
wonder
great
if we
question.
had stats for this, like actual data to support those questions.
Generally, generally they'll do it, because they, if they didn't, then they would no longer be reputable, if you will, and people would stop paying them. Plus, they've already exfiltrated all of your data. So from a ransomware perspective, they don't care. They already have your data. Now the question is, will they actually delete the data on their side, or will they just sit on it for a couple of years and then start sliding it into these big giant releases that we start to see, where they bundle together previous breach data and then just add little bits of new data into the middle of it. That's what we're starting to see, is that, you know, these people aren't honest. That's the whole reason they exist. So yes, they're going to unlock your data and give you your decryption key, but they already own all of your data. So they'll just sit on it and reuse it and resell it down the road.
But then the question is that why, if you have backups, you have all your data, why ever pay it then? You know, from a circular perspective,
Just sweep it
like
under the
what?
rug. So first of all, either you didn't have proper backups, which is still a common thing out there, or it's the cost of recovering your backups because they were never tested and you never went through that process of what does a recovery procedure look like, would be so expensive that it's less expensive to pay the ransom and just unlock everything in place. Or it's damage. You just want to sweep it under the rug. You don't want your clients to find out. You don't want your investors to find out. You don't want anybody to know. We're seeing a lot of that, where now the new rules and regulations are you have to report it, especially to the SEC, requires reporting it within a certain time period. Um, those rules are becoming more stringent and they're actually enforcing them now. But before, people would just pay it and sweep it under the rug and pretend it never happened.
Yeah, that just feels like it's surprising that people pay it, but in the end, it feels like from what I've heard, folks that have incidents, they pay it, they get their data back, they feel better in the short term, but you
Yep.
just don't know what happens 5 years from now. Yeah, scary stuff.
Yep. That's why what we do is really super important. Like super important. So the first thing that we do is starting with zero trust. We only allow access to information based on the device, its location, and the person who's logged into that device. The second one is our SIEM, which is Security Information Event Monitoring. It's real-time monitoring of everything that's happening on the computer, on the server, on the network, cloud, wherever we can gather data from, we're pulling that information in and we're monitoring it for real-time threats. SOAR, again, that automated device isolation, user account suspension, that automated reaction. Even though we're looking at things within 5 or 10 minutes and starting to take action, this can work within seconds. And so those seconds count when we're talking about we're fighting against AI and fighting against automation. And then finally, multi-layer backups. So from our perspective, all of our user data syncs up to OneDrive and SharePoint, which is then backed up with our SaaS backup solution. And then all of our clients' on-premise servers are backed up to our regionally separate data centers. We've got one on the East Coast, one on the West Coast. And then we have an additional 30-day immutable cold storage backup that's in the central US. Immutable means it cannot be touched. It means that even we can't touch or can't delete or edit the data for the first 30 days that it lands there. So in the event of a ransomware attack that manages to impact the client, us, our data centers, like they get into everything, there's still that 30-day immutable backup that even they can't touch. So we plan for absolute worst case scenarios, which then allows us to recover things completely, entirely, rapidly, detect things as early as possible, and block the attackers out in the long run. This is not about a small, let's just put up a wall and try to hope they don't get over or around, but we've got to have the perimeter fence in place. You've got to have the field with people actually watching the field as, you know, for potential people coming in, and then you've got to assume that once they do get in and start causing damage, that you've got the ability to rapidly recover from that damage, and to limit its effects. So it's a whole spectrum. Should we dive into some scenarios?
Yes, please.
You want to look at some notable breaches from this year. So first one we're going to take a look at is SolarWinds, because this was an IT software application that was used to monitor major networks, and we're talking major networks. This thing was everywhere. U.S. government agencies were the big high topic visible one on this. Um, Essentially, SolarWinds had a developer, and that developer's system got breached, and then the attackers, rather than trying to cause damage, just simply went and started inserting code into the SolarWinds systems. And a intern I had used a very poor password policy, so there was just a whole bunch of poor um, IT security and IT hygiene within the SolarWinds organization at the time. This particular incident caused us to fully reevaluate our tool set and determine, what monitoring tools do we need to have in place, and do we need those tools to have always on access. So for example, as a result of this, we stopped using remote monitoring and management tools. We pulled RMM completely out of our stack, and have switched to a system that utilizes an ephemeral agent that drops on for a few minutes a day, pulls itself off. And so it allows us to provide the same level of protection and coverage and what we're looking for, but it protects our clients as well. So again, the things that we do to protect our clients are things like the SIEM ingestion, the SOC monitoring, the SOAR automated response, and then SASE blocking connectivity to the command and control servers. So the way that we would protect clients who were impacted by this, which we didn't have any that were impacted by this particular breach, but it would have been specifically that blocking connectivity, because as soon as we're tied into all of the threat traffic, we're tied into what's happening out there as researchers are discovering new things, and we would have been able to block those command and control servers very rapidly to prevent access to client systems. Number two, Colonial Pipeline. So this one led to a huge shutdown and caused gas prices to spike on the East Coast and all sorts of things. The attackers gained access through compromised credentials. Plain and simple, right? Somebody's username and password was reused somewhere and they got access to it. So, what do we do to provide protection for this? The first one is dark web monitoring for breached credentials. So, we uh, just got a notification actually for somebody who used to work at Datatel whose credentials are now out on the dark web. Just got that this morning. So, those types
Good.
of notifications, it's really important that we monitor for that stuff. Um, the second one is automated password rotations on all client admin accounts. So if we have admin access to a client's systems, whether it's fully managed or co-managed, those passwords are being rotated frequently. And that's in addition to having MFA. That's in addition to putting access restrictions on them. So we only allow access from our dedicated SASE dedicated IPs. And then the tested multi-layer backups and zero trust methodology of not allowing things access unless it's validated. We're also moving rapidly towards a on-demand and admin on-demand account solution where the admin account doesn't even exist until we need it, and then it exists for the time period with the access that we need, and then it's deleted. So we're moving rapidly towards even better protections than what we currently have. Number three, the Facebook data breach. Um, not much I can say about this one. The Facebook was breached. 530 million users' personal info was breached. The thing, what can Datatel do to provide protection for this? Not much. The best thing that we can do, and this also goes back to Experian, is their breach is another great example. All we can do is train users and hope that they get the message and hope that they take action. But end user training is really the only thing that we can do in this scenario. So good reminder, personal choices on what to post. If you put something out on the internet, it's permanent, it's public, and everybody's gonna see it. No matter what protections you select on Facebook to only show to certain people, assume that it's gonna get out there and that everybody's gonna see it, because at some point it will. Secondly, use a password manager and use unique passwords at every site. Don't reuse passwords. That's the big thing we saw at Facebook was people's passwords were then being used to log into bank accounts, then being used to log into work accounts. Use unique passwords everywhere you go. And then other things you can do to protect yourself are put a freeze on your credit. And what that does is it locks up your credit scores at the three major credit reporting agencies where it cannot be used unless you specifically go in and thaw it. So you can say, hey, I want my credit score to be accessible during this particular date range while I'm looking for a car or a house or need to make some transaction utilizing your credit. Otherwise, lock it down. And then also monitor your property titles. Property titles are it's a signature to get a house or a piece of property moved from one person to another, and there's no validation that's in place right now in most jurisdictions. So putting a notification system on your property titles to ensure that you know when it's updated and you're notified of that. Cheap insurance. But this is one of the scenarios where the breach is too big, right? There's not much protections that we can put in place.
Sometimes bad things happen and we can't control that.
Yep. But we can help clients limit their exposure, and we can help people limit their liability when it does happen. And that's what the user training is all about. So a good end user training solution is really important to just send out, hey, weekly reminder, go watch this quick little video, answer some questions, just keep security somewhere. It doesn't have to be top of mind, but let's keep it in the top 5, right? So we talked about this. We can look at, we talked about consequences through the entire presentation here, but looking at your cybersecurity protocols, incident response planning, regular assessment of your security measures. As an organization, you have to have these things laid out. You just do. And insurance requirements are becoming more and more strict, and they're beginning to require more documentation from you to prove that you're doing these things. So let's see what else we got here. So best practices for mitigating threats, looking at things like business email compromise and ransomware, strategies for preventing BEC. We talked about it, but conducting regular security audits, end user training. Anytime you have a financial transaction, anytime something changes, anytime somebody says, update my bank account, please, send the money to this address instead of this address, please. Anytime that happens, validate it. Have a process in place to validate it using a different method. So if the request comes in by email, you make a phone call to a number that you have that's not in the email, right? To a number that you've already predetermined who to call to validate those changes. If the request comes in via call, then you validate to an email address that you've validated, that you know have preset. So always have two methods of communicating with your clients or your vendors to validate any financial transaction changes.
For multi-factor authentication, has Microsoft made it? I know at some point you were able to turn off MFA with Microsoft. Are you able
Mhm.
to do that anymore? I heard that they were potentially going to be jettisoning that and not allowing you to turn that off with your
They are
environment.
making it increasingly difficult to disable it. um, Increasingly difficult. And they're making the multi-factor authentication uh, requirements much more stringent. Where it used to be, oh, I could just get a text message to my cell phone, but SIM swapping now and the ability to intercept text messages is child's play at this point. And so that's not effective. You got to have an app on your phone, and you have to validate numbers that come through. And then MFA became a thing. Fatigue became a thing where the attacker would just keep sending these MFA pop-up requests to your phone, and eventually you'd accept one just to make it shut up. Um, and so there's all MFA is a constantly evolving process right now. Personally, I'm moving almost everything over to security keys, so some sort of physical device, or now most password managers have a security key function within them that will allow them to function as that security key. So MFA is evolving in order to protect from these risks. Ransomware. Robust backup is really important, but even beyond that, you've got to go back a step and be able to detect when an intruder's in your system. Uh, that's just that's where we are. You've got to be able to detect once they're there and to automate locking them out so that it doesn't happen, on Christmas Eve just after everybody left the office, because that's when they're going to strike. Cybersecurity awareness training. We talked about this, but let's talk about it again. Regular sessions really lower the likelihood. So we've got clients that requested cybersecurity awareness training. They implemented it within their organization. They made it mandatory and they monitored it. And they provide incentives for people who complete it. When that happened, their scores and because we were sending phishing tests to them, their phishing test scores just changed drastically. The users were actually paying attention to emails coming through. They were actually aware of what was happening, and they were incentivized to prevent these types of attacks. So it means that when an attack does occur, they're far more likely to identify it and take the appropriate actions on it. So I can't overstress the importance of security awareness training.
I mean, now that you mention these kind of key mitigation factors, it's just like you could do this. You could do this yourself for really cheap. Turn
Mhm.
on MFA, get a security awareness training platform, right? For a few bucks a month, right?
Yep.
Like this is all just like super basic, sometimes free and cheap stuff, right? That don't require any
Yeah.
money.
Right. What it does require is a little bit of time and effort, and a planned strategy and holding people accountable. Like, it has to be monitored. Doesn't take much, right? You log into a console or run a report, add it to your, like we do, add it to your EOS metrics, right? Where it's something that your phishing attempts and what that level is needs to stay at a certain point. So add it to your monitored metrics, add it to your KPIs and what you're monitoring within your business to ensure that your employees are getting it, and again, keeping that cybersecurity in the top 5 of mind. Let's take a look at implementing response plans. That's another really big one. Almost no organization out there has a response plan for what to do when an incident occurs, and so they're blindsided and they don't know what actions to take. Um, we've developed response plans internally because we standardize on our fully managed clients. We standardize across the board on the technologies and platforms being used. So we have standard incident response plans already in place. This is a very time-consuming process, and then you have to play it out, and then you've got to make sure that it actually functions. But it's beyond important for rapid recovery when an incident occurs. When something happens, you need to be able to address it and deal with it in a timely and correct manner. So you know who to call. You're not panicking, and the more you panic and the more you do stuff. Or here's a great example: if a computer itself is compromised and an attacker's on there running ransomware code or doing something on that computer system, if you shut that computer system down, you have now destroyed data. Because anything that was running in the RAM or memory of that computer, the processes, the way that that attacker was getting in, has now been destroyed. So in that type of a scenario and event, yeah, you may have stopped things from getting worse, but your cybersecurity insurance is going to come back and go, well, now we can't tell what happened. Now we can't run traces. Now we can't go back and find out who to blame, right? And they can and will deny coverage over incidents like that if they can't, if you've destroyed data. Far better to just unplug the internet connection from it, or shut down your internet connection at the office, or turn off Wi-Fi, isolate the computer, but keep it running. So those are the types of things
So
where you have to have
use
a
a hammer,
response plan in
basically.
place. Yeah,
Don't use a
don't.
hammer. Okay.
Don't use a hammer.
Good to know.
It'd be the equivalent of, oh, I came to my house after dinner and discovered somebody broke into the front door and walked into my house and started stealing and taking stuff. And you go running into the house, touching everything and moving things around before calling the police, right? You're destroying the crime and the crime scene and the evidence.
I would just light it on fire, probably.
There you go. So yeah, response plans are a really important part of everything as well. And then finally, a holistic approach to cybersecurity. Again, everything comes together: technology, policy, personnel. It all has to work as a holistic solution in order to provide a proper cybersecurity approach.
For the response plan, is that something that we could templatize and then be able to provide folks as like a giveaway at some point? Is that something that would be possible?
No. And the reason for that is because it depends heavily. The response plan is a checklist of what you do. And we can cover the high level of, like, here's the big steps, 1, 2, 3, 4, but the individual steps that actually make up the plan itself involve who is the person that is going to get notified of a breach when it occurs, who is your cybersecurity insurance agent, and how do you reach them, what's their response phone number, who is their incident response team. When that team engages, who on your side from the technology perspective is going to engage with them, right? There's a whole litany. Where are backups stored? Who has access to those backups? Where are the decryption keys for those backups? It's a big process putting all that together.
I think we could create a chat GPT that would train on what a good template looks like and be able to force ask all those questions to create a plan.
Mm-hmm.
That would be cool. That would be really cool.
Yep. So that's it. We ran a little bit over today, which is fine because we ran a little bit under it last week.
We got one more. Yeah, we did. Let's do one more last question. What if I'm a small business owner with less than 10 people? Why would a hacker target me?
They're not targeting you. It's just a shotgun approach. You're going to get hit by a stray bullet. That's all there is to it. They're not going, oh, I want XYZ small business, but they do know that a small business with less than 10 people is going to have less cybersecurity in place. They're going to be easier to get into, and so they're one of the favorite targets. It's like easy candy, right? They can just walk up and take it from you because you're not really protecting it. That's the danger of a small business with less than 10 people. You're not being specifically targeted. You just happen to get caught in the crossfire.
Nice. This is great. Thanks so much for your time. And yeah, it sounds like we've got a few more of these planned as well. But today was awesome. IT security threats. There's a lot coming down the pipe with new technology developments, AI, different threat actors changing the way that they're doing things. This is all super, super helpful. Appreciate your time.
Yeah, absolutely. Have an awesome day, everybody. Thank you.
Thanks. See you next time.
Ben.